Yeah, I can start whenever. Not a big deal.
Okay. Looks like we're live.
We are live now.
We are live.
Awesome. Awesome. We are going to start here shortly. Let's let the listeners trickle in for a second, but we are live and in living color.
Exactly.
Exactly. So what I'll do is I'll hit the start on the audio here in 1 second. And I will start a little intro.
That works.
So here we are, Rob, with the inaugural episode of Video Game Sages.
That we are.
man of a few words there.
Yes. I've always found that less equals more.
Less equals more. So, Rob, this is the interesting one. We've known each other for a long time, and we were chatting it up a little bit ago, a few weeks ago, perhaps, and we were like, let's take our knowledge and share it with the masses here a little bit and shoot the proverbial shit, as you would say.
Yep. So that is exactly what we're doing now.
And it's funny is like one of the hardest parts for us was to figure out like a name, and we're like, well, what is a synonym for old?
Exactly.
And we were like, old and wisdom and aged,
Ancient,
and
decrepit.
we're like sage like wisdom. So we're like, well, what about video game sages? And the hardest part with podcasting and YouTube channels and everything is everything's taken. Everything's already taken. Um, but there aren't any podcasts that are video game sages right now. There is the Nintendo Age offshoot video games sage, or as I like to call it, video games age. um, but there is no like channels or anything else that's active and ongoing. That's called the video game sages. So I figured we could maybe say something smart here right at the beginning. What do you think, Rob? You got anything smart for everyone?
Smart, huh? Oh, that's a good question. Let's see. Smart.
It
Let's
start
see.
with well, actually.
I'd prefer not to.
So, let's just start off since this is the inaugural episode. Let's go ahead and kind of introduce ourselves. So, Rob, if you want to go first, and then I'll follow.
Well, as anyone who's known me or has listened to the Dyer and Betty YouTube channel, I am Rob, aka Dyer. An author. I've written Memoirs of a Virtual Caveman, plus a couple other books I'm working on. I've been involved in the classic gaming scene since 1998 online. But unlike some people who just, stopped collecting when they got older, I never really stopped. I kept going. And that also led to my fan sites like West Mansion, the Splatterhouse homepage. And, well, that kind of brings us to where we are today.
Well, and of course, for those newer listeners, the Dyer and Betty YouTube channel that you're currently doing. So, can you tell us a little bit about that channel too?
Oh, well, let's see. That's an interesting story in and of itself. Basically, just to make a long story less long, I was diagnosed with a liver disease that nearly killed me at the end of 2020. And for a while, I was, that's a life changing thing. So I was, just kind of spending a lot of time surfing aimlessly. And then one night, I happened to stumble across a stream by E.C. Myers, who does something called NES Alphanumeric on Wednesdays. And the community seemed friendly enough, and it's like, this is actually pretty cool. Maybe I'll start doing this at some point. And I ended up talking to Eugene, this is him, and got involved with more streams that came around, and I brought it up to my wife, who everyone who's heard her knows as Betty, aka Haha, You Died. And she was like, this is something we could do, and we could make it funny. I was like, that's a good idea. We could be like the Burns and Allen of video game YouTubing.
And you did a Burns and Allen reference.
Yes. So, yeah, she is the Gracie Allen to my George Burns. And
Gotta love it.
yeah, it's been fairly successful so far. We're still getting new subscribers, doing a new video every Wednesday, and every so often streaming over on that channel too. So,
Nice.
how about you? How'd you get involved in this whole crazy thing?
So I'm a bit insane, a bit crazy. So I'm Jeff, of course, and essentially, like you, I'm a bit of an author. Written a few books. How many?
A
How many is
few.
enough? It's well over a dozen. It's well over a dozen, maybe over 20 now. Books.
Yeah, at least.
Yeah, started writing back in I want to say about 10 years ago. Started my first book, but prior to that writing, started the Video Game Masters Club back in the day, where I created emulation in a browser, and realized you couldn't make money for that, and I couldn't pay for the server costs. But while I was doing that, I was writing a bunch of articles on hidden gaming gems. And well before that, I did write Hagen's Horror Haven, which was a horror movie website too, because that's my second love, besides for video games, is horror, scary movies. But basically, after my website of the Video Game Master Club went away, I was like, I need a way to preserve this, and that's when I looked into, getting a game publisher or book publisher, which I found one in Europe, and then that website went away before I could even get physical copies of my book, which is irony. So then I looked to figure out how to do it myself, and around that time, I had read multiple other books about collecting consoles, and I was like, well, I want to see a visual representation of one of my favorite consoles of all time. And so when I was creating the complete NES, I was like, I want it to fit in my pocket. I want to carry it around to conventions and be able to check off whenever I get the same manuals, because I had gotten the Ninja Gaiden 2 manual at least 3 times at conventions. And I was like, I need to stop getting the same manual, so I wanted a way to visually see it. And I don't like using phone apps. So I like, old school like collector's checklists. Um Ironically, I took it to Kickstarter, and everybody loved the big giant coffee table book version. So then that became the de facto what I'm known for, is the big, beautiful coffee table book collector's guides. And currently, I've been working on what started as an April Fool's joke, which is kind of how these go, Rob.
Yeah.
And I was like, I will do the complete Nintendo Switch, as an April Fool's joke. Lo and behold, about a year later, I decided I'm going to create the Switchopedia, and I'm going to chronologically go through the entire history of the Nintendo Switch year by year in book format. I am currently working into year 3, and I've had to scale things back because books aren't the only thing I do, Rob.
Yeah.
So, other stuff that I've done over the years, I was the commentator for the Classic Tetris World Championships during the Boom Tetris for Jeff meme era, where I was the other commentator saying peacement places, and it was saying crazy things because I didn't know I was allergic to wheat, to bread. And I had a taco and my throat closed, so I was trying to breathe and basically was a little loopy and saying crazy stuff. That went viral, got the Classic Tetris World Championships on ESPN, brought in a new generation of young players, and now they're in a renaissance, a resurgence for the Classic Tetris World Championships, which is freaking crazy. My day job has kept me from being able to do the commentary, and now they got a pro doing the commentary with Chris Tang of Nintendo World Championships and Sega Rock and Rager fame, the world champion Chris Tang. He's still doing the classic Tetris World Championships. But I definitely did that. And I've been in a bunch of gaming documentaries. I was in the video game box art documentary. I was in the Bits of Yesterday documentary over the years.
Nice.
And there's still one little small thing that I do now. Um,
You can call it
I
small if you want.
yeah, so back when I was a kid, because remember, you don't have to do a long story short when we're podcasting, Rob. You can do a long story long.
True.
But back when I was a kid, I always wanted to make Nintendo games. I was like, that's the dream, right? I always wanted to make video games, make Nintendo games. And during COVID, Nintendo told me yes. They said I could publish Nintendo Switch games. So, me being the person I am, I'll figure it out. I ended up figuring out the entire process for publishing modern Nintendo Switch games physically, and we are now. I'm the CEO of Premium Edition Games, and I have a team of awesome people that help me with creating the highest quality of physical items, because if we're going to do physical, we're going to go to the moon. We're going to try to be a modern take on working designs, Rob, if that's any indication.
Yeah.
Um,
I got to meet a couple of them when I was at Free Play Florida last Saturday.
yeah, a couple of working designs or a couple of premium
A couple
guys?
premium.
A couple of premium guys.
Yep.
And so basically, I'm just getting to live the dream. We're about to add a PlayStation to our repertoire, but we're also publishing like classic games too. And essentially, we're getting to take these modernized retro style games and give it old school aesthetics, which is really cool. It's humbling. It's badass. We are now 9 games in hand shipping that we've published for Nintendo Switch, which is crazy. We have 9 games that we've now shipped, because game 8 and 9 are currently going to be shipping in the next like week or two. Like they're literally in packaging and they'll be shipping out. So we have 9 games. The 10th game is like right behind it being ordered. And we could probably in a different day go over like some of the games and the retro aesthetics and all the inspirations and stuff. That'd be fun. But we're not going to take up that. That's not what this podcast is for. I do crazy stuff, though. But it's been fun.
You've done a bit more than I have, I got to say that.
Well, I've
Just a
been
bit.
fortunate. I've been fortunate, though. Like, I remember when we were chatting, what was it? It was probably, I don't know, 6 years ago, 7 years ago. And you were like, because we were talking about, you did Memoirs of a Virtual Caveman. And I said I was writing my own, autobiography. And you're like, oh, you'll get that done in like a week.
I remember that.
I still haven't finished that up. I've been sidetracked with a lot of crazy projects, but it is called Through the Eyes of a Gamer, which is going to be like a Dio reference, which is cool. Ronnie James Dio reference.
Nice.
But I haven't even scratched the surface, and I was writing that before I was even game publishing. So just imagine how crazy this write-up's gonna be. These memoirs, autobiography. It's gonna be insane.
Yeah,
it's
me.
Really.
I'm on the third and final edition of Memoir, so.
That's awesome. I can't wait to read it. I love the stories. You're a good storyteller, Rob. It's freaking awesome.
Appreciate that.
Yeah.
This is one of these things, though, where it's like, I have to stop somewhere. I can't just keep issuing a new version of the book every decade or so. So I'm gonna reach a stopping point, and that's it. There will be nothing else after that. It's not to say there won't be more anything from me, because I have there's 2 other books I'm currently working on almost simultaneously. You've got Eating Candy in Outer Space, which is kind of the companion book to Memoirs. It's basically tells the same kind of stories, but they're not video game related. So it's like, talk about growing up in the 80s and, family vacations, toys, that kind of thing.
Oh, that's going to be awesome.
And the other one is called Digital Archaeology, Retro Gaming Reflections.
Yeah.
That see, I took all the old stories and whatnot from the last edition of Memoirs, split them off into their own book, asked a bunch more people if they wanted to contribute a story, and I basically got enough to make an entirely new book.
That's amazing. Well,
So
I'm I mean, that's going to be really cool, though, and of course, like I'm looking forward to the Candy Book because getting all the retro toy references and all the extra nostalgia from that era is just going to be really cool.
yeah, well, as far as mine's concerned, this is basically confined to one chapter in Eating Candy in Outer Space. But before we go on, looks like we've got a couple people here in the chat.
Nice.
Yes, we've got
What?
Mike's here. Everyone else may know him as Kenga.
Okay.
And he's been a colleague of mine for many years. Does his own streaming over on Twitch when he feels like it. And he's contributed to Memoirs in the past. He also wrote new material for the Digital Archaeology. And we also have LCX here. And now it's good to see you both here. I'm not sure who else is here, but yes, that's right. I mentioned my liver disease problem earlier. Mike had his own thing going on, so eventually he'll start
Okay.
streaming again. It wasn't liver related for him, but that's not my story to tell. So
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. I mean, so yes, people come into the chat, and if you ask any questions as we're chatting it out, feel free. Do you want to go toward the first of our topics? I'll go over a little bit of like what the plans are for today's talk, and then we can go ahead and start it up. So
yeah,
we figured, since episode one, we'd like to talk about like a little bit about us, but also like what our favorite games are and our favorite consoles.
yeah,
So
the ones that influenced us, that turned us into who we are today.
exactly, or influential games and systems, um, and then we'll end it up with like cool things that are out there that we've found or that we've seen. Like if you've seen anything really cool out there that you may want people to know about, and then anything that you have going on currently in the scene. I have a lot always going on, so that'll be easy. That'll be like a little at the end of the episode type thing.
Yeah,
Um,
in my case, it all depends on how the liver disease is affecting me on any particular day.
yeah, yeah,
So
it's give or take.
yeah,
So should we start with games?
well, that's what everyone's here to hear.
Yeah, exactly. Let's talk about the games that shaped us
Okay.
as who we are.
Well,
Um,
let's get one thing out of the way here real quick. I believe you
yeah,
are a little bit younger than me. And it's like
a little bit.
I'm a couple of years shy of hitting 50, so
And I'm a couple years into my 40s, so we're a little bit split in the middle.
yeah. So I got my start gaming a little earlier. And yes, El, you're right. It's definitely night here.
Yeah, it's definitely night here as well. It's like 9:30 p.m. But yeah, so yeah, the games and all that, like of course, me growing up, I had tons of hand-me-downs. So I mean, I grew up with a Pong machine in the house in the Atari VCS, the Heavy Sixer. That's what I grew up on, and then my brother got a Commodore 64, which was our main de facto computer that we would play in there. So I didn't actually get a Nintendo Entertainment System or anything until many, many years later after I got a hand-me-down version of that.
In my case, we started with the 2600. It was a four switcher, wood grain. And it actually was a birthday gift for my mom. So, uh, so we started off. That was about 1981 or so. But I started a little bit before that too, because my older brother had given us uh, one of those Pong consoles. It was just basically play Pong, 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 and nothing but Pong.
Yeah, I had Super Pong,
Yeah,
4-in-1 games. We were fancy.
yeah. I actually bought one a couple of years ago. It was called a Rally 4 by Roberts. And it's the exact same
Okay.
model. Only problem is, for some reason, this one doesn't work. So you can say I started with Pong. But when we got the Atari, we started. That was, as I said in memoirs at one point, that's when gaming was a family thing. We'd all take turns, playing games. Of course, the 20th century came with all the paddles and the joysticks and games you could need.
Oh
So
yeah,
it's
absolutely.
not uncommon to see my parents trying to beat each other's scores in a game like Canyon Bomber.
Yeah, Canyon Bomber's a classic though.
Yeah. So, but
It's one of those where you're just dropping off and into the canyon trying to score more points than your competitor.
yep. So we had that. We had stuff like air sea battle, of course, combat, because everyone had combat.
Yeah. I mean, my favorite of that era had to have been Pitfall though.
Yeah. That one came along just a little later for me. The first one I had that was a favorite was Haunted House.
Okay. Yeah, I never actually played Haunted House till many years later. Like we had, Combat Air Sea Battle, Video Olympics, but the main ones that I would have would be what is it? It's Pitfall, but also Pole Position on the Atari.
Yeah. Yeah, we cleaned up a lot during the Great Crash '83. Because, before that, we'd get a game every so often, and all of a sudden you're starting to see games for like 50 cents in the stores, brand new. So we got loaded.
That's how I got mine.
Yeah. So, but Haunted House
But
was the first one that really struck me. My mom was a classic horror fan. She liked ghost stories and things of that nature. So this was right up her alley.
yeah.
And me, I was just like, so I have to like run from a ghost and a bat and a tarantula and do this stuff. It had such an impact on me that many, many years later on the old digital press forum they would do an alter ego game. And I actually signed up as the ghost of Old Man Graves. So and it was funny because I made this whole big deal about it. And it was like, who's in here trying to get my urn? Yeah, Mike remembers that.
Jeez.
Not sure why the chat's on a side note. Not sure why the chat isn't showing up on the video here. I don't know if you guys can see it or not.
Well, technology isn't a big feature of old men, so
Well,
expect them to not work great.
and
Yeah.
as Gary Shandling, but
Yeah,
as Eugene once told me, you know, whatever can go wrong will go wrong when you're streaming.
exactly.
But
Exactly.
yeah,
So, yeah, so like the games that shaped me though, like weren't of that era.
mm,
Like mine were more so when I started coming to my own as a gamer when it came to the 8-bit NES era and then later 16-bit Super Nintendo era. And so a lot of my games are influential from those eras.
oh, I barely scratched the surface on that. In fact, yeah, yes, Al, we are using OBS.
Yeah. So that's the classic though, is that, going through and talking about our favorite games. Maybe we should just like go back and forth and talk about a game and
Yeah.
go to the other side. And
Well, I'll tell you that the first one that really made an impact beyond just trying to get the high score for me, it's
Mhm.
like there's something here that can be, it's bigger.
Mhm.
And let's see. Hang on a sec, Al. Said turn off the chat, then turn it back on. I don't know if I
Yeah.
know how to do that.
Well, I would prefer to, we can do technology talks later with the chat.
Yeah.
Let's just do the podcast.
All right. Oh wait, click on the I.
Otherwise, we're going to talk about technology the whole time. Yeah.
Okay. This may have just have been a very simple fix. So, but that one game in particular that really clicked with me was Pitfall 2. And it's
Fall
like,
two.
there's no lives, there's no time limit. You're getting points, but you actually have a quest. You're supposed to rescue Pitfall's niece, Rhonda, and his pet mountain lion, Quick Claw, and get a couple other things along the way. And to this day, I cannot hook up the 2600 without playing through that at least once.
You know, that was like always the game, the elusive Atari game that I never found. But I had played Pitfall 2 on the Commodore 64. And to me, that was always the definitive version because the graphics were a little bit better. But, like the Commodore to me was like a step between Atari and NES. But it took forever to load.
Yeah. My good friend Braunley actually had a 128. So when I moved from Connecticut to Florida back in '89, and he was the first real friend I made. So of course we clicked over video games, and I had never seen any kind of Commodore computer before that.
Yeah.
So, but question for you: since you've played the 64 version of Pitfall 2, did that have the second quest?
I was never good enough at the game to actually, save and save your what is it, your cousin?
It's your niece and your pet mountain
Niece?
lion. Yeah.
Yeah, because the mountain line you see at the bottom of the screen, you have to go all the way around through the maze. You see it on the start screen, right?
Yep.
You see Quick Claw. That was from the cartoon as well back in the day.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so yeah, I never was good enough to get more than a few screens before I lost all my lives. Whereas the original Pitfall I was able to beat. So like craziness is I just wasn't good to I wasn't good enough to like not keep falling into the water. Basically.
I find it funny you mentioned lives in Pitfall 2 because I interviewed David Crane for the second edition of Memoirs, and since I'd seen him talk about Pitfall till the cows came home, but I had never actually seen him really talk much about 2, so I, of course, asked all my questions about that. And he'd mentioned that the red crosses you touched in that game were basically like the first video game save points.
Yep.
So, and I also, for a very brief time in the mid 80s, had access to an Atari 800 computer.
Oh, nice.
And I got to play Pitfall 2 for that. And, obviously I was already good enough at the 2600 game. So when I rescued Quick Claw, I'm just like, yay, game's over. And all of a sudden this door opens up behind Pitfall and he gets shoved into another set of caverns and my jaw just dropped. Like, whoa, more? And that was... I never legitimately finished that second quest.
Oh, that's wild. Like I didn't even know there was a second quest.
Yep. In fact, that version of the game is called the Adventurers Edition.
Adventures Edition. Yeah, I don't know if the Commodore 64 has that in there or not because typically what you would see back in that era is, you'd have programmers that would port it to all the different consoles and computers. So it's always, at the porter's discretion, and they may not have even added the second quest.
Yeah, and that what happened was, according to him, was that the guy that ported Pitfall 2 to the 800 and all that, they just built on his code and added new stuff. It's like you actually had to escape the caverns. So, and you'd run into things like rabid vampire bats and fire ants and things like that. But you had to connect a rope. You basically had to collect a rope and a snake charmer's whistle and like bring it all to one place, and the charmer would appear and just make this rope that would come out of the caverns, and with everyone there with it, and then the game actually ended. But
Wow.
see, we have
And
Gnaw Dog here in the chat. So
okay,
thanks for
so
stopping in.
the 2600 ended with Quick Claw. Yeah, I was pretty
Yeah.
sure that 2600 is not going to have any bells and whistles on it. That's for sure.
These days it could with all the homebrews, but yeah. But let's see. Now,
Yes.
there was another game too, right around the same time, and it's not one that anyone would really think of, but it was for the TRS-80 computer, and it was another Pitfall-like adventure called Downland.
Downland.
Yes, that was another one I latched onto.
Interesting.
And
What's notable about Downland?
well, you had lives in this one and score, but basically what you were doing was trying to get through these caverns in a set amount of time, or at least make it to the next cavern. So you'd collect money bags along the way and gems. You'd have to climb up ropes, avoid boulders, acid drops, and if you waited too long, a bat would come out and kill you. And it was just, again, not quite like anything I'd played before. So I latched onto that one too.
That's awesome. Yeah, you went super old school, whereas like my first game is like new school compared to that. And no, we haven't discussed Splatterhouse at all yet. We're saving that one.
Yes, that's coming.
So we'll go with my first one, which is a gimme. I'm gonna start older,
All right.
and then go to newer instead of like in order of like my favorites. And we'll just go straight with Super Mario Brothers 3. Super Mario 3. And mine was an insane story because, I mean, when I got my NES originally, it came with Mario Duck Hunt. And then a Christmas later, I had gotten a copy of Athena for Christmas from my grandma. She always would go out and hunt for games. Well, my cousin really, really wanted Athena, and he had a copy of Super Mario Brothers 2. And so we did a swap of Athena for Mario 2, which is probably the best deal I've ever done back in the day, because
I'll say.
Athena, not the greatest game, obviously. But when that next year, when Super Mario Brothers 3 was released, I was able to save up money and get it new. And I had remembered I had played that game so much that I had, worn it out. Literally found different secrets. Of course, Nintendo Power gave us everything we wanted to know with secrets of warp whistles and all that. But then I had remembered that later on, the movie The Wizard came out.
Yes.
And it was hilarious because by the time they had revealed Super Mario Brothers 3, like, I had already played and mastered the game.
Yeah.
So it was like watching it out of order was hilarious because they're talking about going to get the warp whistles the very first time they ever played Super Mario Brothers 3, not read any magazines, yet they knew that there were warp whistles and where they were.
That was kind
And
of
I was
ridiculous.
like, how do these kids know that? It was like ridiculous though.
The
Like
magic
I
of
just
Hollywood.
like magic of Hollywood. And I mean, it was the same thing when, they were shocked by the score of Double Dragon that, his brother got. And it was like, there's not even that score. It doesn't even exist.
Yeah.
Classic. But like Mario 3, though, just being the quintessential platformer, having the level selects that you could do a little bit out of order. Being able to use the warp whistle strategically to get to whatever world you want to go to or skip right to the end. Just like having a ton of variety. Unfortunately, no save states or save places or any of that, which would later be rectified with, different their 16-bit reimaginings or hacks that I've seen on the NES, which have some really nice save state hacks and things where you can go around between the maps, which I love.
Yes.
But it just was one of those that really showed me what a video game could be. Like it went to that next level of, okay, now this is a complete experience. And sure, there were games before that, but that was the one that really connected with me. I don't know if you have any Mario 3 stories, Rob.
Oh, I do, and Mike can already hear it coming. But before I get into that, hey Chad, thanks for coming in. So, all right, my Mario 3 story is a little different. I remember when I had shortly before we left Connecticut and moved to Florida, we'd gone to the local Toys R Us, bought a 7800 game, and they were giving away copies of GamePro #1. And of course, they had that overseas prospect in there, and the one they covered in that issue was Mario 3. And I'm thinking, oh man, Mario 3, I love 2, and 1's really good. Oh, it's going to be something. Yeah. So, waiting and waiting, about a year and a half goes by, and then it's, what they call it, Mario Monday or something like that. And it comes out. I'm able to secure a rental from the local video store.
Nice.
And I get it. And I'm playing it, and I'm enjoying myself at first. And remember what you were saying about how there's like no way to save or whatnot? Yeah. I was getting so far because I had no idea where any of the warp whistles were and like that. So I actually left my NES on overnight just to save my spot.
Classic, yes.
Yep. But I had it for the entire weekend. So Friday night started with, yes, Mario 3. And then Saturday I'm like, yeah, Mario 3. This is long. Really long. And then by the time Sunday rolled around and had to be returned, it's like, it was good. I don't see myself buying it now. I'm probably going to rent it again. I have never traditionally been a fan of Mario 3. In fact, I actually think it's a bit overrated. My Mario game was 2.
Mario 2 was a classic. But yeah, to me it was just the overall way that the world was created, and then when you had Super Mario World come out on the Super Nintendo, it like brought it all into a nice package where you could see the whole world at that point. Mario World,
yes,
like
I remember. Yeah, I actually, that's my second favorite Mario game is Mario World.
Yeah,
but that was. Yeah, Mike knew it was coming. But as far as the NES is concerned, I first got to see that in action right around the same time as the Sega Master System. And I am a big Master System fan because of this. And when it came to the NES, started off getting one, and the first game I fell in love with, that was Contra.
Contra was awesome.
Yes, we actually got it as a kind of a moving present in '89 to kind of soften the blow of moving to an entirely new state. And before we left, I had the opportunity to hook the new NES up, and we were able to go rent some games. And once I was able to get Contra, I'd played it once before, and I knew there was a 30-min code, but I could never get it to work before. This time I got it to work. I spent hours just going through that game over and over and over and over. Mm-hmm. And it's more like, this is what I'm talking about here. This is great.
See, you're more of the retro short play arcade style.
Yes.
Like where you can play over and over again, whereas I like my lengthy platformers and action adventure games and things. So we're gonna have a nice little back and forth, which will be fun. I did see that Michael mentioned that even though he doesn't care for Mario 3, he does like Mario 64, which he says you loathe even more than Mario 3, perhaps.
It's not even a Mario game as far as I'm concerned. It's just like it doesn't play like one. It doesn't feel like one. Most I can say is that it looks like one. It's too different.
I mean, it's the first ever 3D platformer done in that style. Not ever done, but in that style.
Yes.
It's its own version.
I can account for that. I also want to bring up something here. Mike just said, "You get your own line, Rob." There's a story behind that. if I may digress for a couple of minutes.
Go ahead down the rabbit hole, Rob.
I briefly worked at GameStop back around 2002, 2003, whenever Halo 2 was being released. Now, I'm not a first-person shooter fan. Never have been, never will be. Although, I recently kind of taking a little liking to the original Doom.
Oh, I mean, who doesn't like boomer shooters is what they call them nowadays, but like Doom is like
Boomer
its
shooters?
own beast. That's what they call it. There's
Wow.
a minor retro revival for that type of first person shooter. Not Halos, the overly pixelated Doom Wolfenstein 3D style.
Gotcha.
There's a game called Ion Fury that was released on modern consoles recently, and it has a Duke Nukem 3D slash Doom style to it. And there's another game called Dusk that was released that also. And if you look on modern Steam, there are hundreds of them now.
Well, had to happen eventually. But
Oh yeah.
in this particular case, they were having the midnight launch for Halo 2. And I'd never been to one of these before. So I'm like, I'm going to start working here shortly. I'm going to go check this out and see what it's like. So I get there around 11:30, huge line outside the store, you know. So, and they also had, some free sodas and chips. So I grabbed a soda and a little bag of chips and just kind of stood there, mixed in with the crowd. And at one point, my manager comes out and he's like, "All right, everyone who pre-ordered Halo 2, step over here. Everyone's here to buy it. Step over here." And the crowd splits. I'm standing there in the middle. And people just kind of look, just, you don't know where to go kind of thing. So I just look at the manager and I'm like, "Hey, is there a line for people who don't care about Halo 2 but are just here for the free food?" And he just looks at me, he's like, "You get your own line, Rob." I got a lot of dirty looks that night. It was great. So,
You weren't part of what we call the Graymers, those that are looking for the newest modern warfare and the newest Madden. Those are the Graymers.
I thought they were the Dude Bro Doritos guys.
The Graymers. They're not gray metal. They're not quite gamers, but they're gray.
Yeah, I think that's what happened to your Dude Bro Doritos guys, Mike. They turned into the Gramers.
Yeah, they're all Graymers now. I don't even know if Graymers are even a thing anymore. I think it's more like people just, I don't know. It's a weird modern diatribe now.
Yeah,
Craziness.
I stay away from that. But yeah, going back to that 8 and 16-bit era, that was
Hmm.
that was when it just all clicked for me. I mean, the Atari was
Hmm.
great intro, the stuff computer, and what I was like, just kind of cracking the door a little bit to kind of peek what was lying ahead. So, and then playing the Master System and the NES almost at the same time for me was just, I was like, that's it. I've found what I was meant to do.
Exactly.
And then the 16-bit generation happened.
Blew our minds.
Did it ever?
Yeah, that's where most of my games exist, like my favorites.
Oh, I've got many. But
I picked two in the 16-bit era that I'll highlight.
all right, go for it.
Um, and and the first one is my top game of all time, my favorite game of all time, game that I can play every year for the rest of my life, and I'd be happy. It's A Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past,
Yeah, it's
and
a good one.
that game just like blew me away. And I was in an era when, with the NES, I had rented almost all of my games. Like Mario 3 was one of those rare games that I actually was able to buy. Most of the time I rented. And I saved up for years to get my Super Nintendo. And when I finally was able to get the Super Nintendo, it was when the Super Mario World Mario All Stars combo cart was released, which was way later.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
Um, yeah, and I had come across at a flea market or a yard sale a copy of Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past. So I had picked up a copy of Link to the Past and was able to play that game right at the beginning when I had the Super Nintendo. Because before that, I would just go to friends' houses and play all my 16-bit consoles, which included Genesis and TurboGrafx 16. I played those, as they came out because we had the neighbor kids 2 doors down that had every single video game system. So I was fortunate enough, but they were the troublemaker kids, so my parents never wanted me to go over there. They were the Pearsons, And like they just didn't want me over there. But I was like, well, I want to go play video games. You can't do anything about it. Then they ground me, and I would be stuck at home for a while. But Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past was like my swan song. That was my game that I was able to play. Got me like into you know action RPG, action adventure genre. I had deployed to Iraq, and one of the guys that I deployed with claimed that Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past is a role playing game. And I was like, it is not a JRPG, guy. Like, you lost all your clout with me. To me, it is, the action adventure extravaganza of a lifetime. And I just enjoyed it so much going through the game. I have multiple Legend of Zelda tattoos. I have the Triforce on my arm. I have Ganon from it on my other arm. And it allowed me to get my revenge on Zelda. Because the original Legend of Zelda, I had done what you did, which rented the game over the weekend and left my system on so
Yeah.
I could play and beat it. Got all the way to the point where I got to the end of Zelda and Ganon was revealed at the very end when I hit him, and the game did the blinking red light.
Oh, ouch.
And I never played Zelda again until much, much later. So I was so mad, but Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past allowed me to get my revenge on Ganon. Finally, after all them years, and that became my de facto favorite Zelda experience for the longest, longest time. I don't know if you have many Zelda stories for Link to the Past.
Link to the Past. Well, let's see. All right, let me just establish a couple things first. For one thing, the Super NES is my least favorite 16-bit system. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm not saying there aren't some great games for it, but when compared to the Genesis and the Turbo, the Super NES is like a distant 8th place for me.
Interesting.
Now, as far as Zelda is concerned, yeah, started off with the original Zelda 2. Love the original Zelda. Zelda 2 was one of those games that was just like, and what was it, G-Van 2? Welcome to the stream, and yes, distant 8th. There's a few other systems that rank before it, not just 16-bit. But
And yes, Chad, I did play the Game Boy Advanced version of Legends of Link to the Past. It's awesome. I was working installing pools back in like 2004, and I was playing Legends of Link to the Past while I was doing it on a Game Boy Advanced SP. Like,
Nice.
just classics.
yeah. Here's the thing, though. The year I graduated high school was the same year that Link to the Past came out. And for my graduation gift, I received a Super NES. Well, I got to me, the really important games taken care of first, but I knew I wanted to get a copy of Link to the Past. Have no regrets. That was a great game. So, not really a story per se, but it was good. I played through it again several times. Zelda 2 was just the one I was never any good at.
I was never a big fan of Zelda 2, and there's a game we can talk about in the future that I've signed and published, and it's like Zelda 2 done right. It's so good.
Oh, nice.
But like Link to the Past, what blew my mind was when you did the whole initial quest to get, the Master Sword. Like, to me, that was like the full game to me. I was like, man, I'm gonna go through, I'm gonna get the Master Sword, then I'm gonna go fight Ganon. And then when you get to Aghanim, who's, the big wizard, you get the big reveal that he was just puppeted, and it was like ridiculous. Then you got sucked into the dark world for the first time, turn into that rabbit. Like, you already saw the rabbit, but like you get sucked into the dark world, and it just opens up, and it was just mind blowing how crazy and deep that game was. I just loved
Yeah,
it.
absolutely. But
And then we have you played Link Between Worlds? I loved Link Between Worlds on the 3DS. That was awesome. It's like a reimagining, almost like a spiritual sequel to Link Link to the Past, where you play in the same style of Hyrule with a lot of the same little nods with placement of different, like with the town and where Death Mountain is and a bunch of different things. But then you just got the extra aesthetic of you can go into the wall as a painting and do all the extra pieces to it. That game was in my top 10 for the longest time. Link Between the Worlds was
Yeah.
awesome.
Link to the Past, or not Link to the Past. Link's Awakening was the last Zelda I ever played through.
Oh,
That
Link's Awakening is a classic.
I remember trying out Ocarina of Time on a friend's N64 and just going, "Yep, I'm done." In case you haven't guessed, I'm not a big N64 fan.
Yeah, I mean, if we're gonna talk N64 stories, like Nintendo 64 is a console of that time. It was fun to play rental style with friends on a party weekend. Go back now and I can't really concentrate on many of the games. If you're not a 3D collectathon platformer, which I know, Rob, you definitely are not.
No, absolutely not.
But unless you get off on doing like the Banjo Kazooie's, Donkey Kong 64's, collectathons, they're they haven't really held up that well. Like, I mean, I went back and tried to play GoldenEye 007, which I loved back in the day, and it just didn't do much for me, and it's unfortunate because I had so much fun with it growing up. Now, it definitely was one of those things back in the day where the games were so few and far between that I ended up saving up because I was working at the time, and of course saved up enough money and bought a PlayStation. And I mean, like, there are games on the PlayStation. There's one that's on in my top five for sure. But yeah, I got the PlayStation and didn't really look back because there were so many classics on there.
Oh yeah.
We got Michael being the stupid hipster who loves Majora's Mask, and that's like one of those that I just never could get into Majora's Mask. I hated having to go back and replay levels over and over again in a Zelda. This wasn't fun for me.
Yeah, done with Ocarina of Time and the whole N64 thing. There's actually only one game to this day that I could actually play over and over for that console.
What's that?
So are you talking to me or is there somebody in there?
No, what was that?
Oh, what was that? F-Zero X.
What was the game? Of course I'm talking to you, Rob. We're on a podcast.
I didn't know if someone be knocked on your door. But F-Zero X. That game is just fun.
F-Zero X was a classic, and it was one of those games where I think I had borrowed it from a girlfriend's brother, and then we broke up, and he never got his game back.
Oh, sucks to be him.
So I think I still have that copy to this day of F-Zero X, and it was a classic. Like, I just remember all the different chips was really cool at the time.
And I'll just say, unfortunately, one game is not enough to get me to buy a console. And for a time, I actually owned a couple N64 games, fully intending to buy a console, until I just was like, you know something? I did not like playing through these.
I'll tell you the one game that I go back to this day. It's not on the online console or any of that, but it's Blast Corps. That is the one game on the 64 that I love.
I will say, what little I played of that is really fun. But
Yeah, and I mean, if you like to play arcadey style games, like that is a really fun one because I mean, there's just so many different destruction and construction items that you get with like the bulldozer, but then you get like robots that you can destroy buildings and you just prevent nuclear warfare. And that was one of those where I had rented it, of course. And then I think we had a snow day or something. And when I was playing it, it was like we got to the moon. And when you get to the moon, if you unlock everything, like it's ridiculous because then it unlocks more as you get the medals, and then you get all the planets, and then you can unlock all the gold medals. Once you get all the gold medals, then there's platinum medals you can get, and like we had platinumed everything on that game. It was just obsessive. It was so good.
Nice.
So good.
So, let's take a look at the chat real quick here.
Stupid backlash. I love it.
L only had Famicom Game Gear for over a decade.
Oh,
Well, that sucks. I love the Famicom. And the Game Gear, that was the only portable console I ever owned.
I was not a fan of the Game Gear.
I I kind of used it as also a portable master system, and I never bothered with batteries. I always had a power supply I used. And
Yeah.
Jibantu says, "Do you all Dragon Warrior / Quest?" Well, back in my younger days when I was a lot more experimental, I did play about halfway through Dragon Warrior 1 before I had to return it, and never really went after it after that. Any of them.
Actually owned Dragon Warrior because I got it for free with my Nintendo Power subscription.
Nice.
Yeah, and never understood it at all. And then later on, like I played it a lot, but I wasn't any good at it. I didn't really understand role playing games. But then later on, and somebody asked, "Do we own a Switch?" I publish games for the Nintendo Switch, so yeah, I own one.
I, on the other hand, don't. So,
I'm a Nintendo Switch physical publisher. But
premium
Dragon
edition
Warrior,
games,
though,
folks.
premium edition games. But yeah, so Dragon Warrior though, I had later on gotten a reproduction cartridge of Dragon Quest 1 and 2 in English. And I was playing it because I've moved all around, and my daughter was, a couple years old and walking around, and we were up in the attic where we had the Super Nintendo playing. And I was sitting there playing through Dragon Quest 1. I'm like, the first time I ever, beat the first dragon, and I'm to that's really the first major chapter of Dragon Quest. And she tripped over my controller cable,
oh,
fell off table, and the game reset and it lost my save, and I to this day still have not went back to play any more Dragon Quest because I just can't pull myself to play it. And the thing that I really like though is the Super Nintendo Super Famicom remakes of Dragon Quest. They halved and doubled, or either doubled the amount of experience you get or half the amount of experience that's required to go to the levels. So it actually made it so you don't have to grind as much as the original NES.
oh, that's nice.
So yeah.
Now,
So
just to establish one thing here, not only am I not a fan of collectathons, I don't have the patience for RPGs of nearly any kind anymore. So
okay.
there's actually only two that I can think of one I actually finished back in the day, and the other one I came really close until the cart was sold right out from under me. And the one that I actually finished back then was the original Phantasy Star.
Okay.
To this day, I have a soft spot for that game, and I always will. In fact, the original 4 games. I've only beat the first one, but I always liked the other ones too. I'm not counting Phantasy Star Online here. That's totally different. But the one where I had the cartridge sold out from under me was the U.S. version of Final Fantasy IV, aka Final Fantasy II.
Final Fantasy IV. I've definitely played through and beaten Final Fantasy IV.
I made it to the moon. I was borrowing it from Bromley, and when I went to see if I could borrow it again, he'd gone and traded it in for something. And it's like, I was
And now
there, right there.
Now, mine were like when they mentioned Game Boy Advance. I actually played Final Fantasy IV on the Game Boy Advance.
Yeah.
That was I want to say that was in 2005, 2006, and I was in Germany playing that while I was at a field exercise with the army. I was playing through Final Fantasy IV. It's such a great game. And then later on, I had played, or maybe it was before that, I had played Final Fantasy 2 on the Game Boy Advance and played Final Fantasy 1 for the first time ever through there because they give you magic points instead of having to use magic spells like you did on the NES Final Fantasy, which I didn't care for. I also see that saying that we should do ourselves a service and play the Dragon Quest games. Well, there is the latest one that I played. I did play Dragon Quest 11 on the Nintendo Switch, and this was about 3 years ago. I was doing this thing called the Taji 100, Rob. You could do 100 miles in the month of February. And you could do it whether you go running, you could do elliptical, or you could do walking, or like with a ruck. And so I was going in Dragon Quest 11, and I was walking and leveling up my characters while I was walking around circles in the park doing my miles for this competition.
Nice.
And I had ended up during that year. This was like 3 years ago or so, before COVID. I ended up getting through the first end boss, the very first whole chapter, which was like 40 hours in. And I'm not. That's like a third of the way, and I'm like, oh no, I'm done. And so I definitely hadn't went back to this day. And for everybody, in the chat, keep in mind, I don't have time to even play any new games or anything because I am testing games as a publisher all the time. I literally tested 3 games this weekend. Um, One was really good, and it actually reminded me a lot of Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening on the Game Boy. It had a lot of those aesthetics to it. The
Nice.
modern game. So really cool. The only thing is that not only do I have to see if a game is like tickles my fancy or hits me in the the retro nostalgic, but it also has to be a decent length, and it can't be like $1 in the Steam. Because if I'm trying to sell a $40 Nintendo Switch physical and the game's like a couple bucks on the eShop, that's a big pill to swallow for some people. Like you can't do like $1 game, $40 upcharge. Yeah. And now I see Ellie wrote about Final Fantasy VII. Oh my goodness. Yeah, that is one of the games when I got my PlayStation I had to play. Now, to me, I can't really go back and play it as it doesn't hold up well unless you're doing the fast forward mode in modern emulators because there's a Nintendo Switch version of Final Fantasy VII and you can just fast forward everything. Um, that actually is the only way to play Final Fantasy VII for me. But back in the day, I probably put 240 hours into Final Fantasy VII. Did everything you potentially could do. Beat the Omega, the Emerald, and the Ruby weapons. Got the Knights of the Round. Got the Golden Chocobo. All this stuff that was like insane that we would like be able to do back in the day. It was such a classic game, and I could never see myself like spending that much time with an RPG ever again.
Now, speaking of back in the day in Final Fantasy VII, I distinctly remember when that came out. Because everyone I knew that had a PlayStation was all like, yes, Final Fantasy VII, can't wait to get my hands on that. And I'm like, well, you guys enjoy. I don't do RPGs to speak of. But the game I'm looking for, pardon me for 1 second.
Is pardoned. I'm just drinking water right now. Parched.
Yeah. Anyway, sorry about that. The game I was looking forward to the most, so much I'd actually picked up the import before I even had a PlayStation, was Symphony of the Night.
That is in my list.
Yes, that is.
Good segue.
Oh, yes, Symphony of the Night. Now, before I get into that, I have to say something. Everyone knows me as a Splatterhouse guy. But
Yeah, and we're gonna tease that for a while.
I will tell you, long before I ever strapped on the Terror Mask, I was storming the castle.
Absolutely.
That was actually, between that and Gradius, those were kind of like defining games as whether or not I would get this particular console. Whatever one it was.
Symphony of the Night, though. Symphony of the Night.
That was amazing.
So good. So good. And
Yes.
the fact that, you could level up all the different aspects of Alucard, where, like, it just seemed to progress and unlock perfectly, to the point where, like, it just hit everything that I loved about Castlevania 3, and Rondo of Blood, which I hadn't played till many years later, mind you. But Symphony of the Night just like hit every nostalgia itch for me. I played the hell out of that game.
I hear that.
No, and there's a game that's a predecessor. I mean, it created a whole genre with this game and Super Metroid on the Super Nintendo.
That was
That
another
hit
good one.
these masterpieces, and that those two games to me are like peas and carrots. They go perfectly together. Um, and like Super Metroid is just an epic space drama, and then you got your gothic drama of Symphony of the Night
Hmm.
and the Metroidvania genre. Like, imagine if I can sign any genre for the rest of my life to be a physical publisher, it's Metroidvanias, and I have three, actually four, but really three in my catalog already of seven.
Nice. I,
Yeah,
I will
yeah.
I will say, with not being into portable consoles, I have never really played the Metroidvanias that came after that.
Really.
Yeah, and
So,
admittedly, I don't have a lot of time to do so either. So,
well, I mean, the thing is that I've tried them. So, like the Game Boy Advance ones, the DS ones, I've tried them. They're just not the same as Symphony of the Night.
no.
I, I don't know why, but they just don't hit nostalgia itch. Now, there are some modern ones that are amazing. That absolutely hit on nostalgia strings. You know, the games like Oxium Verge and Hollow Knight. Those games are like crisp, perfect Metroidvanias. I mean, I'm not going to talk the games that I've signed
Yeah,
because, like, if we're talking a robot named Fight, that's Infinite Super Metroid essentially. It's so good. Um,
nice.
then there's Bloodstained Curse of the Moon, which is like a new age Dracula or Castlevania 3. But like Symphony of the Night just is like peak Castlevania. That game is just so good. And yeah, I absolutely rented Castlevania Symphony of the Night while I owned Final Fantasy VII. Like those two games were like hand in hand for me.
And
Just
my
mastering.
I will say, regarding Symphony, in my case, I actually got to see the import at a local game store, and I think they were actually fighting Beelzebub at the time. So of course my jaw's on the floor, and it's like, this is the
Hmm.
new Castlevania. Oh my god! So I knew a guy who dealt in imports, so I had him order me a copy of the Japanese one. And then when the U.S. one came out, I remember going down to what was it, Electronics Boutique that day, buying my copy of Symphony and my PlayStation and a memory card because of course you're gonna need that. So
And so one of the cool things that I've seen recently that I was able to get a copy of was somebody redid Castlevania Symphony of the Night for the Sega Saturn with US packaging, an English translation.
yeah,
And so I have a copy of it. I don't have my Sega Saturn hooked up, unfortunately, so I don't even have a way to play it. But I wanted a copy because it's one of my favorite games of all time. But what I really love about that version is that Richter is unlocked right at the beginning, but also you get to play as Maria.
yes,
She has a triple jump, and she like breaks the entire game. Essentially, you just go wherever you want, and yeah, it's the fixed Sega Saturn ROM.
yeah. I'll say
Um,
about 2 years after I got my PlayStation, when Saturns were starting to be discounted and EB was actually carrying imports. I made it a point to buy a Saturn just so I could play one import in particular, but then I found another place that actually had the Japanese Symphony for sale. And it's like, oh, it's got like extra characters and stuff. Yeah, I'm totally buying this.
yeah, and like I had no clue because like much later that you could play as Maria and didn't have an appreciation until I had later on VGBS gaming podcast, Video Game Bullshit, where we had played through Rondo of Blood and mastered it, got 100% on it, and the appreciation of Maria, and we called it cheat mode essentially because
She kind of is.
it kind of is. But I loved easy mode Maria, and essentially I got much more of an appreciation for her in Symphony of the Night on the Saturn because of my experience with Rondo of Blood much later. It's so cool,
Well,
cool. Um,
regarding the other Castlevania games, I've been following the series ever since I got my NES, and it was totally by accident too. I even talk about this in memoirs about how parents were buying me a gift. My younger brother, who's actually passed away a few years ago, they were getting us new NES games. And I wrote down a list, and I remember I'd seen Castlevania and Simon's Quest in a rental store before we left Connecticut. Saw the covers, picked them up, looked at the back, and thought to myself, these look stupid. And for some reason that day, I put those both on that list. Don't know why. They come home with Castlevania, the original. And I remember looking at it going, oh, that's a stupid looking game. Well, I eventually ended up playing it and was completely amazed at how good it was. And
Simon's Quest?
no, the original.
The original Castlevania.
Yes. And I have to say, to this day, that is my favorite game of all time.
Castlevania is your favorite game of all time.
Yep. Anyone who's expecting to hear me say Splatterhouse might be kind of surprised right now.
Yeah. I mean, well, the thing is, Castlevania is awesome.
Yes.
Then Simon's Quest is surprisingly underrated.
Oh, great.
But there is a ROM revision that came out. It was a few years back, and it was actually the last episode of Video Game Bullshit we did. It was Retro Reimagined. We just decided to end Video Game Bullshit at episode 100, but then we had a new episode that we recorded, and we haven't recorded since. But it was Simon's Quest, but it was done so you don't have to grind as much. So again, it's like less grindy.
Yeah.
And it's so good, and you can go through, and most of the hidden platforms are, disappeared, so you can actually see where to jump, and it's just a solid. I mean, it's a Metroidvania. I mean, it's Castlevania, but it is. It's
like a prototype. But it's funny you mentioned Simon's Quest too, because after I fell in love with the original, the local game store had Simon's Quest to rent, so I remember renting it, and it's like, okay, all right, the controls like the original, all right, so I guess I got to whip one of these candles up here. It's like a lamp, and nothing's happening. What do I do in this? And it was around that same time I met Bromley, and he'd already played through the game, so he gave me a few tips, got going, and then Christmas rolls around, and that's pretty much the only thing I asked for that year. It's like, I have to have Simon's Quest. Castlevania 2, I want it. So, and from there, after that, it was like Castlevania 3 came out in 90. That was right around my birthday, so got that. If you remember back when I was talking about the Super NES, how I had to take care of the more important games before Link to the Past.
Mm-hmm.
First one was Castlevania 4.
Oh yeah. I mean, a lot of these games, like the Castlevanias, I used to play at my cousin Kyle's house, and he was the one that introduced me to a lot of those games, because he would be the one to get all these games for his birthday, whereas I would be able to rent them maybe from the rental store growing up. So, like, I would play at his place, and we'd play Castlevania 3 or play Super Castlevania 4, and just, like, I'd get blown away. Or, playing Bloodlines on the Sega Genesis.
Oh, I distinctly remember the day that came out. That was day one purchase. And,
such a good game.
And when the Super Game Boy came out, I went back and grabbed the 2 Castlevania for that. But here's the thing. I managed to get a hold of a Turbo Duo sometime in, I don't know, 94. And I'd had the TurboGrafx before then. But I knew a guy who had a copy of Dracula X. So he actually loaned it to me. And I tried it on my new Duo, and it's like, I have to have this. This is fantastic. Found a place that was actually selling it. Not an easy task in those days. But
I played mine on the PC Engine Duo R.
Yep, I first played mine on an original Turbo Duo, just the only revision they ever had in the U.S. But many years later, after there was a major shakeup with me in the early aughts thanks to my ex-wife, but I ended up buying a Duo R, and that was one of the first games I bought for it. I no longer have that for reasons, but I can still play it at least.
Yeah, the only things I still have my Duo R with the little region mod switcher that I got back in the day, and that was upon redeployment from Iraq. I was in Miami, Florida, and being back into all my stuff, because everything goes into storage when you're in the military and deployed. So I got back all my collectibles that I had sitting in storage, and first thing I wanted was like, all right, I need a duo, and I wanted an RX, but I couldn't afford it, so I just got the duo R and with controller and everything. But actually now, I have a PC Engine Express.
Oh, nice.
PC Engine version, but I have it screen modded, so it's like modded with LED or LCD screen, and then I have the Turbo EverDrive in it, so I can play like, all the things with it. Then I have the same thing for Sega Nomad as well with an EverDrive. I have both the Nomad, the Genesis, and the Turbo handheld with screen mods, so and batteries and rechargeable batteries. So that's kind of how I did my classic retro gaming on two of my favorite 16-bit consoles of all time.
Nice.
Super Nintendo's great. That's what I grew up with. That's what I had. I can only afford one, but I have a soft spot for both Genesis and Turbo.
Well,
we got really off the track of Symphony of the Night.
Yeah, but hey, we're just working through them as we come to them. But before we bail on the Super NES here, I do want to say that even though I really like Castlevania 4, there's a game for it that I like even more. In fact, I'd consider it to be my second favorite game of all time. And this would surprise a lot of people. Because since it's Super NES, it's clearly not Splatterhouse. It's Gradius 3.
Gradius 3.
Yes.
Not really surprised, having read your memoirs in the past.
Well, considering I spent years hunting for Gradius 2 for the Famicom, and somehow managed to get it.
I have a copy in the green Gradius.
Oh, you... wait, green Gradius?
Green Gradius. No, it's black with a little hole in it with the red label, right? Gradius 2.
Yeah, it's...
I'm thinking Salamander.
Yes. And, of course, Gradius and Life Force on the NES are great.
Life Force on the NES was one of my favorite games growing up as a kid, and my cousin, on a Thanksgiving, which we just had passed, he brought it to the house because he found it in his high school sitting in the desk in front of him underneath the chair. He's like, hey, here's a Nintendo game for us to play. And he was like, you can have it. And it was Life Force. And there's my love for the Gradius and Life Force and all the Konami shooters came from that moment right there. Freaking awesome.
Mm-hmm. For me, I
never played Gradius 3 until many, many years later.
That was one of the first games that Bromley had a Super NES first, and that was one of the first games he bought for it. So, but I will say here, shooters are kind of my other thing besides Splatterhouse. And Gnaw Dog, I have to say, Axlay is phenomenal. It is definitely in my top 10.
Axlay is an excellent game.
Yes. Actually, Bromley to thank for introducing me to that one too.
Ironically, though, while I progress in the modern era to Metroidvanias, I've actually regressed away from wanting to experience any new shoot 'em ups. I want to just stay nested in my old 16-bit era of shoot 'em ups. I want to be back in the 8 and 16-bit. I don't want to play. There's tons, man. There's so many. So many great ones. I mean, hell, Terra Cresta has a sequel.
Yeah, that was
Cresta.
Like, wait, what? Out of curiosity, have you ever heard of a YouTuber named Shmup Junkie?
Oh yeah.
Yes.
I don't know why, but I can't my head around wanting to experience brand new shooters. I mean, maybe it's because they all try to go toward the bullet hell, and I'm more of a fan of Force and Gradius.
Yeah, it's I like the occasional bullet hell, but I'd have to say the one that's probably my favorite, that's the closest to being a bullet hell, would be Radiant Silvergun.
Okay.
That was the game I actually bought because I found it on sale for the Saturn. That's why I bought a Saturn.
Okay. A lot of the cave ones, if they have a good, what I call the carve button, where if you press a button and it slows down your ship so you can carve through the bullets, that's the only way that I can get into it. And as long as they have a carve button, I see mention of Sinmora on. I have that on the Switch, and it's pretty fun. Pretty fun. But yeah, Cave though is just one of those things where those kind of shooters are really really cool. And there's actually a brand new arcade machine that's almost a spiritual successor to the Neo Geo, and I don't know if you've ever heard of it, called the Arcadia, EXA Arcadia.
I've heard it mentioned, but I don't know too much about it.
Yeah, so essentially, it has four slots in the board, and they're like these little, like square, really long cartridges, and each cartridge costs $1,500.
Wow.
But and there's I think two or three U.S. arcades that carry it, and then there's a ton in Japan. But they have a lot of exclusives for the Exa Arcadia, but there's a lot of cave shooters there. And that's where I've been seeing the reinvigoration of the carve button and all these amazing games. Now is that something that I'm ever going to try to collect, the X Arcade? No.
That's like me collecting for the Neo Geo right now. Not gonna happen.
Well, I have a full Neo Geo collection. I'm good.
I have the PS2 Neo Geo Classics thing, the SNK Arcade Classics Volume 1. That's about as close as I have.
Like, so back when I redeployed from Iraq, I made a decision that I was going to get the Neo Geo. Back then, it was much, much more affordable. And so I got my Neo Geo, I got the controllers, I got almost a lot of the games. I had a converter too from the AES to the MVS, so I could play MVS games.
Nice.
And I went around to a bunch of arcades. I found a few like laundromats that had like used to be an arcade, and I found a bunch for like $10 a piece, and I got Windjammers and
Jeez.
a bunch of the Twinkle Star sprites and a bunch of the really really rare ones for $10 a piece. Those games, and I still have them. The only thing that's crazy with the Neo Geo now is the homebrew scene. I want to say they're like $500 to get an AES homebrew. Pre-ordered one when my daughter was born, and I got it shipped to me when she was 10.
Wow.
It was Krautbuster, which is like a game that plays a lot like Metal Slug.
I remember
But I have
seeing
a
that.
copy of it. But just like the Saturn, I don't have my Neo Geo hooked up, so I have no way of playing it right now. So I have Krautbuster sitting there. I've never played it.
Wow.
And it's like, ugh.
All right. Let me jump over to the chat here real quick. Gibantu. Proteus da, huh? I'll see you, Proteus da, and raise you sexy, Proteus.
Sexy Proteus.
I love the Proteus games. They're great.
So fun.
Oh, yeah.
So fun.
Oh,
I honestly, I love a lot about Konami shooters, even if they're funny.
sometimes that just makes them even better.
You get to fly around the penguin.
Yeah. Or, like, oh, my favorite boss from Sexy Proteus has to be the penguin with the toilet on his head.
Yeah.
And gosh, so much great stuff about those games. But then there's also the dark side, Odomedius.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few that just don't necessarily hold up.
And also Nawdog says, salutes, thanks for your service, man.
Thank you, thank you. Ironically, while I do all this publishing and game publishing, I'm still serving. I'm gonna retire here in a couple years.
Nice. A friend of mine retired after
Retire in
being,
my
and
40s.
a friend of mine did that from the Navy. He was a hospital corpsman and did a couple tours in Iraq, and now he's in a band. He's practicing in his field, and he's doing pretty good for himself.
I mean, my thing is that I was just writing books on the side just to keep my OCD brain going, and game stuff was all still technically it's all still a hobby. But even though we're making waves and stuff, publishing games, it's crazy. Like everyone's like, "Wait, you do this on the side?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm still serving."
Yeah.
I'll retire eventually. I mean, we're on a nice little long weekend this weekend, which is nice.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, it's just allowing the reconnection with retro gaming has been what's kept me going. It's been fun.
Speaking of which, we haven't really touched on the Genesis at all. Aside from
We have not talked about the Genesis at all, and
def-
that is we need to.
yes, absolutely. So you mentioned
We talked about Bloodlines, though. We did talk about Castlevania Bloodlines.
well, Castlevania, but you said you have some favorites for that too. So what are yours?
So, one of my all-time favorites on there, which is I actually hit a bucket list item recently. Toe Jam and Earl. Ever play Toe Jam and Earl?
I remember renting that back then. It was
Like
really funny.
I call I call that my like brainless game. I don't even have to pay attention. I just walk around, play it. My wife and I actually play it, and we just hang out. And we don't. There's like no rhyme or reason. It's not intense. It's like if I want to decompress, I just put in some Toe Jam and Earl and play it. And why I say I just hit a bucket list is I actually published a game, and Toe Jam and Earl's in it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, there's a game, Mighty Fight Federation, and it's a fighting game that plays like 3D, like Power Stone. And now, yeah, Toe Jam and Earl's in it. Kunio Kun is in it, like from River City Ransom.
No kidding.
Along with Ukulele, which is like the spiritual successor to Banjo Kazooie, which not your thing,
No.
and Miriam from Bloodstained, so Igavania, Koji Hirashi's character, is in the game. So I
Interesting.
hit like four bucket lists in a game that I published as a physical publisher. But Toe Jam and Earl goes all the way back to Sega Genesis for me. And that game is just a classic. And I wanted to talk about that one first because we've only been really talking about action adventures and Metroidvanias and stuff, and that's like
Yeah.
the antithesis, the opposite of that. Because what is the Sega Genesis known for? The shooters. Like there's so many,
Yeah.
and they're so good.
And
Gaiaris is awesome with
oh
the guy with the
yes,
mullet. Like
yeah, it's true.
so good. That's a great game though.
And let's see, but Naughty Dog mentioned Rocket Knight Adventures.
Oh my gosh,
Oh,
that game is so good.
love the
Rocket Knight
original.
Adventures and Sparkster.
I'm not that crazy about Sparkster, any of them,
Now,
but
which one?
the Super NES one was good, but it didn't grab me like Rocket Knight Adventures did. And the Genesis one I found to be not as good as the Super NES one. And then there was
Different
that
game almost.
yeah, and then there was that downloadable thing that came out about a decade ago.
The downloadable one, I wanted to love it, and I just didn't.
Yeah. But the original Rocket Knight Adventures, that is like grade A stuff right there.
Yeah, it was such a crazy era where the initial game hit so much nostalgia, then it just follow-ups just didn't quite capture what made the original great. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I don't know if they try to change too much or they, just cashing in on it, but
Yeah.
yeah, it's just unfortunate because yeah, the first Rocket Knight Adventures is like a classic.
Yeah.
Did prefer the Super Nintendo one though.
It's I just couldn't get into the sequels. I tried. So, but as far as like my favorite Genesis games, besides the
Hmm?
majority of the really good shooters, well, I'd have to say I'm a big fan of the Shinobi games.
Okay.
Another one that it really ranks up there with me is the game Mystic Defender.
Okay, Mystic Defender. That was one that I didn't play till later, but I definitely dig it.
And it's got to my knowledge, only a official bit of Sega sanctioned the nudity in a Genesis game.
Now I see why it's your favorite.
I gotta say, it was a surprise though. Brawley got it before I did, and he's playing. He's like, calls me up. I got to the last boss, and there's a topless chick on top of her. It's like, wait, what? Seriously? Yeah, you're not gonna believe it. He comes over, plays the game, beats the thing for the first time, and it's sliding down to the ground, and she's floating in the air. And then he's like, yeah, she's not wearing anything. It's like, How did that get past the censors?
The days before ratings, man. That's just how it is.
But
It's hilarious.
there are
Yeah,
two.
no, that is a classic though.
Oh yeah,
Um, there's some hidden gems though that I played over the years that were just so good on
definitely.
the system.
I
A
will.
crazy Sega Genesis story too, where so when I go around to conventions nowadays, I've been invited and I do panels. And I did a panel at Retro Game Con about 5 or 6 years ago, and I had Thor Ackerland on with me, who's the Nintendo World Champion from back in the day.
Oh yeah.
And everybody assumed that Thor's, Nintendo fanboy. And so I'm sitting there talking with Thor about Nintendo and stuff, and then we start talking about 16-bit era. And somebody in the crowd, not even understanding where Thor came from, just started dogging on the Sega Genesis and the music. And Thor just goes, "Wait, hold on a second. The Sega Genesis has some of the best music out there. I don't even want to hear you crapping on that." He kind of like shut the guy down in like 2 seconds, and it was like
Nice.
hilarious because Sega Genesis has some of my favorite music. I mean, just the stuff like the Kid Chameleon soundtrack, like just such a great classic soundtrack for the Sega Genesis.
And that's one of those games that I'm not a fan of. So, but yeah, Naughty
And the
Dog nailed
music,
it. Yuzo Koshiro, right there. I got to interview him back in 2002, and of course we had to discuss Revenge of Shinobi soundtrack, the Bare Knuckle soundtracks, and
Streets of Rage.
yes, great games those are.
We didn't talk about any beat 'em ups yet.
And there's some good ones out there too. I mean, I'd have to say on the Genesis, probably there's one I prefer for obvious reasons, but when it just comes to the genre as a whole, I have to say I'm a huge fan of the original Streets of Rage. Two is also great, but
Yeah.
it one has that specific Sega aesthetic for that time and place. It's like it would fit right in with the world
Yeah.
of like eSWAT.
I liked one a lot. I really loved Two Crude Dudes. Playing that with Kyle back in the day, and just the music and being able to like throw like giant walls and stuff. It's just stupid.
Oh
It's so
yeah,
good.
that
So
that is.
good.
But
Oh yeah, it's such a dumb, awesome game.
mhm.
Did you speaking of Streets of Rage, did you get to play any Streets of Rage 4 at all on the modern consoles?
I haven't actually. No, I've
Oh,
heard.
it's such a good
And
reimagine.
yep, and you are probably the 100th person I've talked to who's pretty much said exactly the same thing. I've never heard a single bad thing about that game.
No, I really enjoy it, and the only thing that I use Streets of Rage 4 in a bad light for, because I can always come up with a counter, is that I use it as a physical publisher as an example as to why we have a 2-year exclusivity window with any game we will physically publish. Because when Streets of Rage 4 was announced, one of the companies, I think it was Limited Run, had a 1 month pre-order. And everybody thought, okay, so they're getting Streets of Rage 4. And then after the 1 month pre-order, it was announced on 2 or 3 other websites, variants.
Wow.
So there was like 4 different versions of Streets of Rage, all with different pieces. And then they released a definitive edition with all the characters on it on the cartridge. So there's like so many versions of Streets of Rage 4. I call that the conundrum of why we have a 2-year exclusivity for premium edition games. Because I'm like, we don't want to pull a Streets of Rage 4 and kind of irritate people by having multiple versions of the same game out there by different companies.
Yeah.
Now, mind you, we'll do different art or something as a variant for fun, but
Oh yeah.
not like content on the cartridge.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that makes perfect sense when you put it that way.
Yeah, so that's the only bad thing I could say about Streets of Rage 4. Yeah.
Considering I did like the original trilogy, I'm sure when if I ever do get to play it, I'll like it.
Oh yeah.
Trying to think of
And
it.
I mean, with beat 'em ups though, we got to talk Turtles.
Yes.
Like, and on the NES, playing Turtles 2 and then Turtles 3, both classics that I actually owned. I actually owned both of those. That I would get like for a birthday or something. And then when you got Turtles 4 on Super Nintendo, like all so good. Now I never played the Genesis one until many, many, many years later.
Hyperstone Heist is it's basically a remixed Turtles in Time.
Exactly, and I hadn't played that, so Turtles in Time was like it for me. Like, it was so good. I see Naughty Dog's mentioning Shredder's Revenge, and um, that game was like Christmas for me. Playing that this year is so good, and ironically, I think I had pre-ordered the physical Switch copy from a website, and I was waiting for it, so I played it on Xbox Live. Because if you subscribe to it, you can get Xbox Live, but I don't have an Xbox, Rob.
Yeah, that could
So
put a
I
bit of
have
a damper there.
It doesn't because they have a streaming mechanism. So essentially, I had an Odin Pro handheld, and you can play because it's like an Android. There's an Android app for Xbox Live, so you can literally stream Shredder's Revenge to it. So I could stream all the modern stuff from Xbox Live to my Odin Pro.
Nice.
So I was playing Shredder's Revenge on a handheld that's the size of a Nintendo Switch Lite.
Huh.
And I was sitting there playing that on my couch. Like, I'll play Shredder's Revenge. It was awesome. And the lag isn't bad for retro games and stuff.
Well, that's good.
I really love that. Yeah, that was a weird one, though. It's like, I don't actually have an Xbox, but I have a way to play Xbox Live.
Hey, then you're set. I will say as far
Now, I mean, now I have a Steam Deck now, and that would be potentially the next generation, the next level.
Betty wants one of those.
I have one. I would highly recommend.
Yeah, I got to come up with cash first.
Yeah, that's a big one.
But on the subject of beat 'em ups, specifically the Turtle ones, I actually never got into the NES games. With the
Really?
Turtles 2, I'd been too spoiled by the original arcade game. And
See, I never had the original arcade game local because I grew up in the middle of nowhere, cornfields of Indiana. So, like, I had to drive 45 minutes to get to a mall that had the Showbiz Pizza that I could play arcade game.
meanwhile, I still had to drive about 45 minutes to get to where I was going, but I was doing a lot. So nothing like playing 4 players on an original Turtles arcade game. Or even better, 6-player X-Men. I actually had that experience once. It was crazy. But Turtles 3, I just didn't play for years. But I missed Turtles in Time in the arcade originally. I didn't stumble across it until a couple years after the Super NES one came out. But I played the Super NES one. I thought that was great.
Yeah.
And then
Some consider that better than the arcade.
it is. You know, they added a few bells and whistles to it. So,
Throwing the characters toward the screen, which you have that big shredder fight, which is really fun.
yep. But then Hyperstone Heist, I remember renting that. Thought it was really good. Didn't think they could actually pull it off, but they did. And then the part about that game that got me was actually running into Tatsu from the first live action movie.
Yeah.
I was like, "What, Tatsu? Seriously?" I was a little out of the age range of the kids who were into Turtles at the time, but not by much. So I still watched the cartoon and went and saw the movies, except for 2. I don't think I ever saw 2 in theaters. I saw 1 and 3.
I saw 1 and 2, and then waited for the home release of 3, which thank goodness I did.
Well, I think 3 was kind of an afterthought, which like, bored, let's go to a movie. Hey, Turtles 3 is playing, why not? As long as Vanilla Ice isn't in this one, we should be okay. But yeah, I would say if I was to say on the NES, I would say my favorite brawler on that would be Double Dragon 2.
Oh, 100%. That actually was in my top 3 on my website when I did my top 10 games. Double Dragon 2. I actually have the ultimate version of Double Dragon 2, by the way.
Really?
I don't know. It's a little known fact. Did you know the Famicom version of Double Dragon 2 is the ultimate edition?
Oh, I've got that.
The Famicom version has a hard mode, whereas the hard mode on the NES is the normal version on the Famicom.
Yes, I remember reading this. I think I actually did play through the easy mode on the Famicom version at one point and going, "Hey, this is still going after like 3 stages. Does this have? It has an ending. Oh my god!" So,
Well, and like Double Dragon 2, like like Kyle and I have went and set world records doubles on that game. We
Nice.
can master it. No hit runs and stuff. And so we play Double Dragon 2 on the Famicom just for fun on extreme master mode, supreme master mode, and we just play through it just for craziness because we actually found a hack of it later too that even makes it harder and with more bosses. It like breaks the Nintendo because it does too much with sprites.
Yeah.
But it's like we just love that game. That game is like the best. And did you ever play Double Dragon 4?
The one that came out for like Steam and whatnot.
Yeah, Steam, and it came out for it's on Nintendo Switch as well.
No, I haven't played that, but I have played. Was it Return of Double Dragon for the Super Famicom?
Well, the Double Dragon 4 is a tribute to Double Dragon 2.
Nice. I've heard.
And it has multiple different it's basically a sequel to Double Dragon 2. It's so good.
I've heard mixed things about it, to say the truth.
Then is Return to Double Dragon. Well, a lot of people that didn't like Double Dragon 4 were comparing it to Double Dragon Neon, which is a retro reimagining.
Yeah,
Like comparing Streets of Rage 2 to Streets of Rage 4. Two different styles.
Yeah,
Whereas Double Dragon 4 is like literally playing NES Double Dragon 2. To me, it's like I wanted.
yeah. I remember playing the demo for Neon, and it was like this game is nuts. It's like just the game. You cut it and it bleeds 80s.
Oh yeah. Now, Return to Double Dragon, is that the one that was done with like actual with the whole story and everything?
Let's see. It was released over here as Super Double Dragon.
Oh, okay. Because I have something, and it's on my Steam Deck, and it's like it's from the PC though, but it's some kind of Turn to Double Dragon, or Return of the Double Dragon, or something like that. And essentially, it takes Super Double Dragon, it adds like a Enter the Dragon style story, and you can press 3 different buttons to change your martial arts from Double Dragon 1, Double Dragon 2, and Double Dragon 3, or between Super Double Dragon and Double Dragon 2 and Double Dragon 3. And it is ridiculous. It's essentially the perfect version of Super Double Dragon. It's not like it's some fan redid it all.
Ah, okay.
And it's really good though.
Is the official?
I
I was trying to say the official release of that in Japan was released after the American one, and they basically finished making the tweaks and adding things that they didn't have time to for the U.S. release.
Yeah. Yeah, it's awesome though. I love it.
Yeah, it's but when it comes back to the original game, if you're talking strictly home ports, the Genesis would win it on looks alone, because it looks almost just like the arcade game.
Yes, it does.
But it plays like ass.
It does play like ass.
And then you have there's the 2600 and 7800 versions of the game, which should never have even been attempted. But then you get to the two titans, the NES and the Master System. Now, as Nawdog just said, the NES has the versus mode, which is nice. But
The versus mode was a gimmick.
yes, it was nice. But it wasn't 2-player. You had to earn your moves. What the hell was that all about? I don't know.
Yeah, I was like kind of grinding to get my moves at the beginning. You
Yeah.
find the spot where the enemies glitch, and you can just because once you get the back elbow, yes, Double Dragon 1 is kind of a cakewalk.
But then you had the Master System Double Dragon, and that was one of the first games done by Arc System Works, I think. And aside from being a little stiff, it's pretty much the definitive 8-bit Double Dragon as far as I'm concerned. Probably
No, I mean that's looks great. It plays solid for a Master System game.
yeah, and there's a lot of good, solid Master Systems out there too.
I mean, I only played it in the power base converter on the Genesis at
well,
Kyle's house. So,
It's identical to how you'd be playing on an original Master System that way.
of course. Yeah, we just didn't have an original Master System.
Right. I didn't own one myself until a few years ago, and that's the Japanese one. It was actually given to me. So he's like, I don't use this, and It's like, well, I'll take it off your hands. How much you want? Yeah, you can have it. Sold.
Well, exactly.
But when,
Somebody mentioned a Bobo's Big Adventure.
yes,
Like, I don't know if you've heard of that.
I
That
have.
game is so good.
That
So
is
good. I also have that on the Steam Deck now.
nice. Yeah, that game is
It's such a classic.
nuts in a very fun way.
It's just like how you take like one of the characters that's running around from River City Ransom and you rip off their head and eat it.
Yeah, it's been years since I played it, but okay.
Ironically, you're talking like years, and I played a game, River City Girls, with London with my daughter, and when we were playing it, you play as two girls as you're playing through it, and their boyfriends are Ricky and Cunio. But in one of the store owners is Jimmy and Billy Lee and Jimmy Lee.
Oh, nice.
The store owners, and they sell you the Hyper Knee from Double Dragon 2. So like my character has the Hyper Knee. I run around and just Hyper Knee the crap out of people. Like I was like, oh, I get the Double Dragon 2 Hyper Knee. This game's perfect. Then London wanted to steal my character because my character was leveled up, and I was like, ah.
Well, it's nice to know the Lee brothers are still getting work.
Yeah, exactly. It's a classic. And apparently, there's River City Girls 2 now that's out, which I haven't played, but.
Okay.
Skullmageddon has a shop. Yep. That's hilarious.
Well, I think now would be the best time to go into the TurboGrafx 16 because we've been on now for almost 2 hours, and
Have we toyed around with everyone with
I
the
think we have.
I will tell you. So, if we're talking favorite consoles of all time, I like my NES, of course.
Oh,
Super
yeah.
Nintendo was a blast from the past. Neo Geo's great, but TurboGrafx 16 is absolutely one of my favorite consoles of all time, and it's simply because it was unattainable for me as a kid. Like the neighborhood kids had it. They had Bonk's Adventure. They had Tricky Kick. But they had one of your, alma maters, the one and only. They also had Splatterhouse, of course. But I only get to play it for a couple hours every once in a while. It's in a blue moon. The first console that I bought was the TurboGrafx 16. And I still keep, as I find games every once in a while, I still keep and buy TurboGrafx 16 games. It's such a good system.
Yeah, that's been my. I first played it back in early '90. The same friend of mine who had the NES and the Master System also got a Genesis first, and which actually, before we briefly, I just wanted to say my two favorite Genesis games of all time: Gunstar Heroes and Space Harrier 2.
Oh yeah,
But
great games too. Gunstar Heroes is amazing, by the way.
oh yeah, but anyway, he brought the Turbo down to visit because he still lived in Connecticut. He had Bonk's Adventure, he had Victory Run, he had Keith Courage, he had Ninja Spirit.
Everybody had Keith Courage.
He had Ninja Spirit.
Such a good game.
That alone, right there, sold me on the system. And then,
Oh yeah, just being able to like multiply your character in Ninja Spirit and then have like 2 and 3 and multiple blades and so good.
and not I'm actually more of a fan of X2, to tell you the truth. There's just something about it that, I mean, do like the first one quite a bit, but the second one is just so moody and atmospheric, and I'm just a
You
big
just
fan.
not get into Legendary Acts 1 or 2.
Well, 2 is my favorite of it too. But anyway,
You don't use an axe but a sword.
you can get an X. So,
Later.
yeah. But what happened is that while he was there, he had some spending money. My parents and my younger brother and him went out to the store one day. I was visiting Bromley. Came back, and he walks into the room, and he's like, check this out. Tosses me a box. New Turbo game. And I'm looking at it, and I was like, what the hell is this? It's like, it's some dude with chainsaw hands, and he's fighting Jason Voorhees. I need to know more about this game. So of course he's playing
Oh
it,
yeah.
and I'm like, this looks good. I can get behind this. And then when he got to the Biggie Man fight at the end of stage 3, I was pretty much sold. And that
Oh
was
yeah.
when the Turbo officially became my most wanted console. And as soon as I got my first real job, right after I graduated, I actually took my first couple of paychecks, went out, bought a Turbo, bought a small stack of games, bought the CD unit. It was great. But Splatterhouse was definitely the first one I looked up. And
Yeah.
yeah, Splatterhouse has been and probably always will be my favorite TurboGrafx game. This should come as a
Well,
surprise to nobody.
surprise to nobody, and I purposely skipped over its sequel on the Sega Genesis just so to let you talk about because I love Splatterhouse 2 on the Sega Genesis as well.
Yeah. Now, no, Doug, you bring up the whole censored thing, and if you
Hmm.
actually go through
It
and
was.
not as much as you might think. It's like if you go through and actually compare the two games, the only things that really got censored between the PC Engine and the Turbo were the religious symbols. So,
And the red mask versus the white mask.
well, that was more of a copyright thing, I think. Didn't want to get
Yeah,
sued
I
by
was trying to
Paramount.
avoid. Yeah.
But the Evil Cross that was replaced by this blue monster called Evil Sleep, and the Hell Chaos Evil Dead tribute was replaced by a Tombstone. And that's pretty much the extent of it. For the most part, it survived intact.
And I always want to mention whenever I can Wampeku Graffiti on the Famicom, which
Oh,
is one of my favorites.
that is the reason I started West Mansion. That game.
I mean, behind me, whenever I record
Mm.
in my game room, whenever I'm doing an interview, I have I do what's called bot art with perler beads, and I have this. It looks like a lake along with some trees, and looks like a Bob Ross painting, but it's on like felt. And I created Rick and his girlfriend right here on, and she's like throwing her arms up, on there, and then the evil end boss with the eyeballs. But the whole background on this art piece makes it look like a jack-o'-lantern almost.
Nice.
So that's like on my background. It's a giant piece of Splatterhouse Wapaku graffiti art that doesn't exist anywhere but here.
I'm gonna need to see that. Yeah,
Oh
no.
yeah, for sure.
Yeah, of course, no, Dog. You mentioned the arcade game, and that was first. And since they were using custom hardware and all that, that was why it was so much more gory. They had to scale a lot back to fit Splatterhouse on a Hue card. So, and I know about the Venom Arts remake. Uh, I should probably message him and see what's up. Maybe I'll do that later. But yeah, needless to say, after that, I ended up getting 2 and 3 for the Genesis, and 3 was the other brawler I was going to mention for the Genesis. It has problems
Yes.
that prevent it from being great because
Uh-huh.
there's way too much recovery time. It's like it takes forever for Rick to get back up once he's knocked down,
Uh-huh.
and
Oh yeah, for sure.
all that BS with the special weapons and the poltergeists and all that just. Ugh. But
I wasn't a huge fan of 3, unfortunately.
it's still, to a degree, I actually still prefer it a little bit over 2.
Mm.
But those one shots, such a pain in the ass. But yeah, and then of course when you got to talk beat 'em ups, you got to talk Splatterhouse 2010. It's a 3D beat 'em up, but it is kind of the natural evolution that the series had continued past 3.
And you might have had something to do with that game a little bit.
Maybe just a little. Like, yeah, I was an unofficial consultant.
Exactly.
Read into that. I
And
didn't
that
get paid.
game, I don't know how much I actually played in that the 2010 remake, but I played a little bit. I have it for sure.
Well, there are traces of my fingerprints all over that game because I had the ear of the lead artist and one of the producers. So every so often,
I have the mask statue as well. From one
yes,
of the pieces.
I've got one of those myself. I will say that they were very receptive to hearing ideas from the fan base, and in fact, if I hadn't stepped in, Biggie Man might have ended up looking terrible. Luckily, luckily, the art director on the game, Dave Wilkins, was also a Splatterhouse fan from way back. So, and speaking of which, 3 days ago was the game's 12th anniversary.
Yeah, isn't that crazy?
It is crazy. We've now spent much more time playing that game than we did waiting for it, and it felt like we waited forever for it.
Exactly, and now we have nothing after that game.
Yeah, it was a Pyrrhic victory. So, and that had a lot to do with the then president of Namco Bandai Japan. He didn't trust Western developers, especially after the crap that Bottle Rocket pulled. Let's see here. Also, yes, Naughty Dog Dave is a comic art god. He has done some phenomenal pieces of work.
Awesome. Well, I will tell you that frequently I get asked as a game publisher, like, what franchise I could bring back. And outside of Star Tropics, which comes up frequently, Splatterhouse is the one. But I would bring it back with retro 16-bit aesthetics with the 1 and 2 style gameplay. 100%, that's how it would go.
I have ideas for how the game could go story-wise. I don't think they leaned into it enough in the 2010 game. But
They definitely didn't. But just imagine if they went the Streets of Rage 4 style.
I can
So
see
you
that.
just put your hooks in the nostalgia of one and two, Streets of Rage. So you just do the same thing with Splatterhouse.
Yeah.
Just call it Splatterhouse 4.
Yeah, I'm down for that. Bring me on as a paid consultant, and you'll see some results.
Well, exactly. That's the thing, though. So if there's any one franchise I could reinvigorate, it would be that. 'Cause that's just gotta happen.
Well, if I had to pick two, obviously Splatterhouse is first. The second would be Gradius.
Yeah, I mean, there's still some of the Konami's given to a lot of its franchises.
Yeah, and just Gradius has been up and down over the years.
Yeah,
Oh well.
fortunately.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway,
Great.
it's about 11 o'clock my time.
Yes. So I think we talked a lot of classics. I think that's a good portion to wrap up. So basically we can go what we've got going on when it comes to like gaming and all that stuff.
Before we do that, I did want to make one final favorite game. Mention one, I should say. And it's actually from a more modern console. And it's long. I've only finished it once, but I can't recommend this game enough. And that's El Shaddai.
What's it called?
El Shaddai.
El Shaddai?
Ascension
El
of the
Shaddai. It's a good
Metatron.
game.
Yeah.
That's a good game.
It is. That game is nuts in the best way. A little on the long side, but definitely fun to play.
I mean, we didn't mention one of my favorites. El Shaddai's great, by the way. But of course, Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild, like that could be for a future episode, like modern masterpieces or something, because that's just a classic that I really loved.
Yep.
But yeah, and of course, talking Nintendo Switch and modern imaginings and stuff. Like there might be a whole episode that we have to do of games that Rob should play on Nintendo Switch. Because there's a lot. There's a reason why this is like the Switch is quickly becoming my favorite console of all time. Like it really is. It's because it has the best of modern and retro.
Unfortunately, its price is a little too cheap for someone on a bit of a fixed income. So, or is it cheap or expensive? Expensive.
You said cheap, but it's too. Yeah. But the Steam Deck on the other side is even more, but it's another classic. So, um, insanity. But yeah, let's do a little bit of what we got going on.
Yeah.
And so as we mentioned earlier, I'm the CEO of Premium Edition Games, so I'm working on publishing physical Nintendo Switch games. We just had our Black Friday sale going on yesterday, which we brought back our Robot Name Fight Deluxe Edition, which has a Neo Geo AES style case. It has a retro Super Nintendo style box with a steel book in it. It has a guide, a strategy guide, a premium strategy guide that I created with soft touch and foil and craziness, with a Nintendo Power style aesthetic. That sold out almost immediately, Rob.
Damn.
Yeah, so, but we also brought back the strategy guide by itself, and there still are a few copies of that left. We also brought around a copy of Super Blood Hockey, which is like NES Ice Hockey, but blood and gory. We had 20 of those that were assembled because we initially had done a retro edition that was an upgrade, and so we assembled 20 of them for Black Friday. And the other piece is that our first NES game that we released as Premium Edition games is Ore Body Binder's Tale, which is like Mega Man. And we did a silver edition where I actually hand crimped these little stars that I actually have like a crimper for. And so I hand crimped that on the front of the box that has like a embossing to it, which is really cool. And we had 20 of those. All that stuff sold out like it was crazy for Black Friday. But we had 4 other items that are currently on the website for Black Friday, and then Cyber Monday's coming, and we're going to try to get up some really cool ornaments that we have. We have our 2022 Christmas ornaments, which is going to have some retro style, Metroidvania style, 16-bit art on it, as well as we do this charity with Gamers for Kids where we set up game rooms, and we do variant cover art for some of our releases with the Gamers for Kids charity where a percentage goes to the charity. And our Metroidvania meets Shovel Knight a game, which is Cathedral, which is like NES style Metroidvania. It's awesome game. We're doing our Gamers for Kids variants of that game for pre-order / in hand. It's shipping for Cathedral for Cyber Monday, so that would be really cool. That's coming up though. But yeah, we get to live the dream, get to make
Nice.
really cool games, and then we also are working on, because I'm working on some books. I finished a couple books this weekend with my Switch Collector Volume 2 Part 2, which is the second half of Year 2 on the Nintendo Switch. I finished that up, put a bow on it this weekend with the contributor section where people tell their stories, and I did a mini version that's like a instruction booklet, but it ended up being 82 pages. So I got to figure out if that can do a staple bound instruction manual for that, which I don't think I can do an 82 page instruction manual. So I'm gonna have to see about binding and stuff for that. But yeah, and I've been working on my Worlds of Power style guide of Black Box Challenge, which I released with my first complete NES book. I'm doing a whole retelling of that plus strategy guide, which I've been working on for a few years. I got some art for it, so I finally am putting a bow on it. I think I need like 2 more art pieces, and it'll be done. That went up for pre-order like years ago, and so that'll be shipping soon, hopefully.
Nice. Now, speaking of books, if you recall, really early on in the stream, I mentioned how I was following one E.C. Myers. Well, look who just popped up in the chat.
Nice. You did talk about E.C. Myers.
Yep. Eugene is an author himself. He's written several books, including several for the series Ruby.
Sweet. It's awesome.
So he's got a pretty expansive catalog. I suggest if you like Ruby or just want to read some good stuff, check out Eugene's work.
Nice.
So now
it's awesome. What projects do you have coming up, Rob? Because I know you're going through your own personal business, but
yeah,
what are you currently working on
well,
besides for Dyer and Betty?
Well, as you know, I'm just your average gourmet, bon vivant, world traveling, jet setting playboy, but I do other
I mean,
things
true
too.
story. You do that.
Well, what I have mainly right now, besides Dyer and Betty, is the books. There is a final version of Memoirs of a Virtual Caveman coming. There is the first companion book for that, which is Eating Candy in Outer Space, which is basically the same kind of nostalgic stories I tell in memoirs, except that these don't involve video games. And for that matter, that is actually one of two books that are like that. The first one goes from the late 70s up to about 2000. And the second one, whose title is going to be The Chicken at the End of the Street, covers from 2000 up to whenever I finish. So, and I'm also working on another game-related book called Digital Archaeology. And that's going to feature all sorts of the kind of stories like you'd find in memoirs, just by a wide variety of people, including among them Eugene and Mike. And there's also
I might eventually have to submit a story.
you still have time. I'm getting close to the end, but you still have time if you want to do one.
I have a few stories that I've written for the Through the Eyes of a Gamer book that won't be coming out for a long time. So
Yeah,
I could submit one of those.
yeah, that'd work. And it also has interviews in there as well with people involved in the game industry. So beyond that, I have my own original works that I'm going back and forth on. I'm currently working with a family friend about a book that involves a subject very near and dear to her, which is cupcakes.
Mm-hmm.
Mainly because she runs a cupcake shop, very successful one at that. Except
That's awesome.
she's also a horror fan, so now we're gonna mix them together.
Horror cupcakes.
Yeah, I'm not gonna go into any details, but the other thing is my continually on again, off again series called The Chronicles of the Raven at this time.
Oh yeah.
I've been working on that since 2000, and it's still not quite in a publishable state. But
It's one thing you could tell about like most creative types is we always got a million projects going on.
uh-huh.
Like, I mean, we didn't even talk about our on again, off again, going back and forth with who's taking the mantle of the complete Genesis book.
Yeah,
Sega Genesis. Like, I had laid that out like many, many years ago, and then I was like, "Hey, Rob, you want to take over the mantle?" You're like, "Sure." And then after a few years, we're like, "Hey, I'm gonna take the mantle back." Sure.
I just especially after I got whacked with that liver disease, it was just
Yeah.
one of those things I just couldn't focus on. It was easier for me to work on my own stuff than try and work on this giant library of games.
Well, and since then, and I became a game publisher, I decided to do an unabridged or an abridged version of my collector's books where there's less write up on each game and more storytelling throughout. So essentially, that's how my definitive complete NES is going to be. That's how the Switch collector is going, starting with Volume 2, Part 2, where it's more collector focused, but then there's a lot of interesting stories in the book instead. So it means that we don't have to write 1,000 game reviews.
Yeah.
And EC says he likes the NES Oddities book. That one was awesome. In my definitive NES book that I'm planning to release, I want to say next summer. I should be at least ready for Kickstarter. That one, I am actually covering my favorite NES aftermarket homebrew games of all time, which includes all the way up to now. I'm just not covering every single release of every single thing like I did in the Oddities book, which was really insane. Like, I can't even believe I did that. And I had heard it mentioned on a different podcast when it was talking about a holiday buyer's guide. And they were talking about because Nintendo Age, the website, has gone away, and when Go Collect bought them, they didn't maintain the forums, but they like deleted them. All of that information from Nintendo Age went away, and where I got a lot of the information from the releases to the quantities that were released of some of the homebrew stuff, besides for the stuff that I personally knew, from the Nintendo Age forums. You can't find that anywhere. So like my book is like the only place now that's kind of like a highlight in the time of Nintendo Age when the NES homebrew stuff was like rampant before NES Maker came around, because that was like literally I did an intro to NES Maker, which is now taking the world by storm and is an amazing tool that people can use.
You know, I understand that. There's actually another book which I have currently available called Tales from the Third Moon. It's it got a limited audience. I mainly did it for future historians. It's just a snippet of life over the space of 10 years on an internet forum. Well, for the first 3 years maybe, we were on EasyBoard, and well, that no longer exists. You can't access anything from it anymore. You can't even do it in the Wayback Machine. But
and those are the interesting pieces.
Yep, and I archived as much as I could originally, and after their servers have been hacked. And what's in that book is currently the only evidence that the EasyBoard site ever even existed.
It's insanity. I mean, it's like we mentioned early on in this recording. Like that's kind of why I started publishing and creating my own, is because I used to write reviews on hidden gaming gems, and that's why book one, because the complete NES book has number 2 on the spine. Book 1 is hidden gaming gems, and those reviews from that website are in that book, and those reviews in that website don't exist anywhere anymore.
Yeah.
So like that is the preservation piece is what's cool, and it comes full circle now that I'm able to preserve games physically as well. And I use processes and artwork like you did back in the day, where we're getting hand drawn art and getting it done, and I'm scanning it in, doing the copy like you did on a Super Nintendo box. Like I'm doing some really old school retro processes, which I love being able to do.
Yeah.
And that'll be a topic for another time, Rob.
I will say, though, as far as any other projects I have going, real quick before we sign off, West Mansion, my Splatterhouse site, which was in archive-only mode for a decade, just celebrated its first year anniversary after I opened it back up. And got some really cool stuff out of that, including an interview with one of the character designers on the original Splatterhouse arcade game, Takashi Oda.
Awesome.
And I will do that, Nodog. I'll message Venomart to see what's going on. And I even reopened my original website that I had back in, I closed it in 2005. It's a site called Zero Signal, which I named after the Fear Factory song. But it's gonna kind of be my hub for everything now.
Nice.
So,
I mean, my website that I'm using, HagensAlley.com for the books is still there, but in reality, Premium Edition is where everything is at. So PremiumEditionGames.com is where all the games are at. We'll post this up in the blogs as well. These episodes.
Yeah.
Not only are we going to have the YouTube channel, which I don't think we ever got the chat to work, but that's okay. But also there's going to be an audio version that I'll be putting on Anchor.fm, which will allow for podcasting as well. And
Cool.
So that way maybe we can get a little different listener base on Anchor as well, and we'll put it up on the website so people can listen to us go on for a few hours at a time.
Yeah, speaking of which, I figure we're probably going to do these maybe about once a month.
Yeah, I'd say once a month, especially if we're going to go lengthy, like a couple-hour episodes. Once a month will be great. It'll allow us to not, because I'm not going to have time to do more than once a month, and I know you're doing Dyer and Betty every week as well. So
Yeah.
this will be a perfect frequency. And with episode 2, I like the idea of covering games that maybe you should play in a modern setting, but then we relate them to the classics.
That does sound like an interesting thing.
Yeah.
And also, Nodog, thanks for being a fan of West Mansion. I'll say that. And glad you've enjoyed it.
Classics
Yes.
is the classics, and we are the sages, the old men. So it's
Old and
See-
crotchety.
to get your knees to get all messed up. And that's the thing that's cool though, is that like we've grew about half a generation apart. We still have the same stories because I had all the hand-me-downs from back in the day. So our experiences are somewhat similar, but then I've been able to like get nested in with some of this modern stuff, which has been I've been very fortunate. And like I did want to mention one cool series before we sign off. Have you heard of the show Turbo Views?
Does sound familiar.
Well, Chris Bucci just finished the entire series. He covered every single TurboGrafx 16 game and a lot of highlights from the PC Engine. And he did DVD series as he was doing them all and finished it up with a box set that looks like the TurboGrafx 16 box.
Sweet.
There's a really cool little bow on it. Back over 10 years ago, he had almost canceled the series because he had a hard drive crash.
Ooh.
And I actually told him, just mail it to me and I'll try to see what I can do. And I actually was able to save all the data on his hard drive and save the show. I sent it back to him all, and all I asked for him to do was to complete the series. I was like, I don't need anything. I just want you to complete it because I love your series.
Nice.
And if you watch it, it's like old school television is what it reminds me of, and its narration is perfect.
Awesome.
And it's really cool. And it's TurboGrafx 16, which is a great system.
Yeah. And one last thing from Gnaw Dog here. Not sure if you're talking.
How old are we?
Yeah. If you're talking to Jeff, you are. You have to give your exact age.
41.
I'm old enough to have grandkids. So.
Yeah.
So, and in fact, I do have grandkids.
I mean, if I didn't wait, I would have grandkids, but we waited to have our daughter till much later.
Well, to be fair, my oldest, I just had her first child earlier this year, so it's actually the same age as Gnaw Dog.
Yeah.
So you're old enough to be a grandparent too.
Yeah, exactly. Could be grandpa.
Yep. I've gotten used to being called grandpa now, so. Anyway, but yeah, I think we're gonna sign off for now.
Yep. So anyways, where can they find you, Rob?
Well, I'm on Twitter for as long as that lasts.
I'm at Hagen's Alley at Twitter.
I'm at Virtual Caveman on Twitter. And there are going to be links provided as well. And I can also be found on Instagram. I don't do Facebook too much, but
I don't have a Facebook or an Instagram. Mine were, since I became a publisher, I became like hacked in things. So once Facebook hacked me, I lost my entire 20 years on that platform, and it's linked to Instagram. So I just never got a new account.
Yeah. And as far as anywhere else, the contact email on West Mansion is a good way to reach me.
Yeah. And of course, you can find me on editiongames.com. There is a link. We have a Discord that's very active. And you can actually recommend games in our Discord on what you want us to sign and preserve physically for Nintendo Switch and upcoming Sony PlayStation.
Nice.
Focuses, we go nice and slow. We're only doing a couple games a quarter. And we're just trying to do like right.
And also,
modern retro done right is our tagline. Modern retro done right.
Gnaw Dog, one more thing. First, thanks, appreciate it. And second of all, if you go ahead and if you're on Facebook and you're following the West Mansion Facebook page, I know that Mr. Splatter made a post there earlier about this stream. So just go ahead and pop into the comments and let me know that you're Gnaw Dog, and I'll know exactly who to keep posted.
Exactly.
So.
Exactly.
Excellent.
Well, everybody, thanks for listening, and we will come back next month when we talk about more on our sage-like wisdom of episodes.
Or the grumpy old man wisdom, one of the two. Back in my day,
Back in my day.
that's the way it was, and we liked it. All right. All right. Y'all have a good night.
And I had posted Rob in our chat with my picture
Cool.
that I promised.
Okay. All right. We're out.